want to do a little Photoshop intro here. If you're using a Mac, one thing to be aware of is down at the bottom you'll have a pop-up menu. So all you do is you take your cursor, drag it, let it sit at the bottom, menu will pop up. If the menu is not there, it could also be on the left side or the right side, but the default position is at the bottom. Photoshop has this little blue and black symbol here, PS, Photoshop. If we click on that, it opens up the program. When Photoshop's open, we will see this blank space in the middle. That's where our image will go, our workspace. We see a tools palette up here on the left. This is the default. These things can be changed and rearranged. We also, at the top here, we have information about the tool that you have selected. Right now I have the crop tool, which I use all the time. Maybe that's why it's the default, or maybe it's just the default for Photoshop. I don't know. Anyways, so up here's information about that tool, which is often changeable, so keep that in mind. On the right hand side, we have more tools to use, actions, or we can put characters, letters, words on there, paragraph changes, but to the most valuable here are layers, and then also the history palette. So these are referred to as palettes. We have that information. There's also another row here, channels, which can be useful. Paths can also be useful. Color, swatches, libraries, adjustments, styles. But most important are layers and the history. Up at the top here, we also get some information. On the very top is always on a Mac, about the Mac. This is just about the computer. So from the left we go broad information, this whole computer thing, and then typically as we move to the right of that, we get more and more defined with what we're using. So we're on a Mac, we're running Photoshop, and files. On Photoshop we can open up files, and in those files we can edit them, and then image we can also do some editing, and then layers and type and select and filter all the way down to help here. Alright, so when we click on those, we get a drop down menu. So here's, this is all about Photoshop, just quitting it, opening it, or setting preferences, things like that. Generally, we don't need to go there too much. File we use all the time. You want a new file? There it is. New file, Command New, and that creates a new file without opening a photograph. So you can actually, in Photoshop, build up with no image and create images. That's really not its strength, and there's different reasons that we have this new file. Mostly we use open. We want to open files, and then we can go through our, paths. On the left here, is the desktop, and that's where most of the stuff is. And then you've got to find the file where it is. Creative Works, and then I have a new project I'm starting here. We'll look at this file. Oh, that's interesting. Alright, so this opens up a photograph. There are other ways you can drag and drop. If you're on the desktop here, what we refer to this, you click on the desktop symbol in a Mac, it's right there, and it'll bring up a window here where you can find stuff, and you can click on desktop and go to images. If you have an image here, you could click, drag, and go to the bottom, open this up and drop it on there, and it will open that file. I'm going to cancel that. I don't really need this file right now, so we'll just get rid of it. But there are other ways to open it, but file open works, or dragging and drop can also work. So alright, anyways, so once we have this image, then we can play with things. Now, one of the most important tools is image size. So image size. So if we come over to image, this is where most of our editing happens, or can happen. Image, mode. We have RGB, which is most common in photography. As a photographer, you want to function in the RGB color mode. That's how labs function. If you give them a file, they'll need it in RGB. Now, you do have to be aware, if you're ever working in graphic design or with graphic designers, print media, like magazines, such like that, they're probably CMYK. The web, though, is RGB, so you really got to know your worlds and what mode it needs to be in. 8-bit are good images, 16-bit is even better, and then 32-bit I really don't use, but more information. We have a lot of adjustments, and these are all right now most of what we're doing until we make a selection of some specific area. If I make no selection when I do an adjustment, I am doing it globally. That's mean I am doing that adjustment to the whole image. Alright, so this is where I go. Curves is what I use mostly. There are some auto adjustments. You can click on them and see if it gives you exactly what you want. Rarely do I find that to be the case. But image size is one of the most important to understand. So typically I don't mess with this unless I need to. So, and there are, some cases I need to. Maybe actually quite a few cases, especially when I get to output. That's when I really look at this. But it's good to know where it is and good to know how to utilize it. Typically we don't want to resample. Because if I resample, I'm changing the pixels. I'm altering the number of pixels. And upsampling, adding pixels, sounds great, but there really is no way to make those images quality. You just get a more pixelated image. So it's best to capture that in your camera and have that information ready to go. You can downsample. Do be careful with downsampling. That means you want to watch up here if you change these numbers. If these change, make sure, is that really what you want to do? Because if those don't change, you can put in any number you want here and you still have all the information that you started with. You see, this number didn't change when I did that because this is not clicked. Now if I click that and then I change one of these numbers, then you can see I reduce the number of pixels. So be aware of that. But mostly what we use this for is getting it ready for our output size. I want to pick 360 pixels, which is the highest resolution you can print. And I want it 10 inches, and then you say, oh, I went to 10 inches and now the resolution went back up. Well, that's because you have it where it doesn't resample. So it doesn't really matter when you're printing if the resolution is higher. The printer you send it to will select its highest resolution and downsample it for you. So that's not absolutely necessary to do. But if I want to see the biggest image I can make, if I go 180 pixels, I could take this file and go 16.5 by 25 almost. And 180 is the minimum print resolution. And that is somewhat dependent upon the printer and their guidelines. Some printers go down to 150 pixels per inch. Anyways, image size is very important to understand and to be careful with. Alright, image canvas size can also be useful. The canvas size now gives me more space around the image, so this is used for montage. So in the middle here is your image, and then it can be placed in the middle or the left or the top left or bottom right or to the right, and then I can change a different size area in which I'm working. And at the bottom here, this is the color that background space will be. So if I do that, and here's a shortcut, Command minus zooms out, and you can see that adds this white space, and then Command plus zooms back in. That's not what I want to do. Over here on the right is your history. I can go back to open. Alright, so now if I zoom out, you see that the canvas is not there. You might need to rotate your image. Not usually, but sometimes you need to rotate your image, and there's image rotation, 180 degrees clockwise, counterclockwise. You can also put in arbitrary degrees, 0.5 degrees or 10 degrees or whatever if you want to deal with it that way. When we're scanning in, you might actually have to flip your image. If we're making a negative or something, we'll need to make it backwards. So when we print it, it is properly presented. Alright, so image rotation can be useful. You can duplicate your image, apply it. Layers, as I said, are image adjustments. The nice thing about these adjustments, most of these adjustments can also be done without negatively affecting the pixels of your image. When you use image adjustment, you are actually manipulating the actual pixels of the image, and there is something called pixel degradation. So the more you edit it, the more the pixels degrade, quote unquote. They get a little bit softer as you do that. One way we can avoid that is instead of using image adjustments, we can use layer new adjustment layer, and you see most of those things that were under image adjustment are under here. Not all of them though, so do be aware there's some things we can't do as adjustment layers. This is typically how I use Photoshop. I use adjustment layers because now when I come to an adjustment layer, it is easy to turn that layer off and on and see what happens with this image. So one of my favorite adjustment layers is black and white, and it's usually the first thing I do when I go to make a black and white image. It allows me over here to select the colors that were in the photograph, and then if I have yellow, I can make yellows lighter, though there wasn't apparently much yellow in this image. Was there any red? Nope, not much red. Maybe there was some green? Nope, not much green. It's all cyan and blue apparently, which doesn't surprise me. Alright, so if I put cyan down, you see the sky gets a little bit darker. So cyan and blue, often there's a lot of overlap between them. There's also some difference. If you want to add, like, exaggerate textures, you take something like this and you go the opposite direction, and sometimes you can add more texture. That doesn't seem to be working too well. Maybe if I put blue that way, this way. No, they're just too close, I guess. Anyways, so I'd like to bring out some of that sky. I don't do all my adjustments. I'm usually fairly cautious with how much I affect the contrast in here. I just want to emphasize some things, you know, particularly if there's one color that I want lighter or darker. I'll use this. So I like the black and white adjustment layer. Now the beautiful thing is when I do that, it makes another layer here, and then if I want to see what it looks like without that layer, I just click that. I'm like, oh. And I can go back and forth infinitely. It doesn't degrade the pixels. And that layer's there for me, and it actually helps a lot of times when I have files. Sometimes I want to print them color, sometimes I want to print them black and white, sometimes I want to make negatives for these images. I can have all those things in just one file. I don't have to have a bunch of separate files for it. The thing you have to be careful is that every layer adds more information on there. So anyways, layers I find very useful. Sometimes type, you know, if you want to put a word on there, you can do that. That's a type layer. Select can also be pretty important, but that gets in more for local selections. So, you know, I'll probably do a separate video on that. Filters, maybe I'll do a separate video. Here's a couple things to look for is rulers. We can turn our rulers on or off, and you see now that there's no numbers on there, so if that bothers you, we can do that. I like to have rulers. The other thing I find useful here is snap, and that's when you have guides. You can have things snap to the guides. If you want to pull out a guide, you come to your ruler on the left here, click, hold, and drag, and it brings me a guide. And I like these. I can turn that off. If I pull another guide, sometimes, like, look at this pull. You know, is my horizon straight? I can kind of check it with these guides. I can also go at the top and bring it down here, and my horizon's actually fairly on. This pull is really warped. That's kind of interesting. So anyways, I like guides, and those can also be turned on and off. You don't always have to get rid of them. If you go Command colon, it turns it off. Hit that again, it turns it back on. So, you know, it's kind of nice. You can also do that through view guides, hide guides. You can lock your guides. So, all right. So view has some useful things. Windows, very useful. If you ever lose one of your tool palettes, like where do my layers go? Well, you can click on layers and it'll bring it up. So if you can't find something, you can't find one of your palettes over here that are typically on the right. A lot of them are hidden. Sometimes they're all in the same, you know, they're layered together. You know, there might be several tabs here that says layers and history and something like that. They can all be layered together. So sometimes they are difficult to find, but if you can't find them, you can use Windows. So, okay, well, there is a brief overview of just some basic things in Photoshop.